Can you hear me? All right. As you may know, I am your librarian, Miss Collins. Everybody's here, right? Is Miss Kiddo's class here? Yeah. Miss Kiddo's class who wasn't in the library third period? Shay, were you in Miss Kiddo's class last period, or this period? Okay, was anybody in Miss Kiddo's class fourth period who was not in the library third period? Okay, no, you were in the library third period. You? So Miss Kiddo's class is down here. Okay, cool. That's what I wanted to make sure before we started. The other thing I have seen quite a bit of just walking around the auditorium is a lot of people had their Chromebooks open and maybe video games pulled up. So I just want to make it clear that you guys shouldn't have any technology out and in your hands for the very interesting presentation that you're about to see. If you may remember, the book Restart is a book that you guys read in 6th grade. Some of you may not have gotten to read it because of COVID, but probably most of you have read that book. And the author of that book is a person called Korman, who is standing right here. So thank you. I'm going to pass the mic to him. Here you go.
All right, thank you guys. Thanks so much for, well, first of all, inviting me to your school. You know, like you guys, I've been going through COVID like we all have, and I don't get invited to a lot of places anymore, like in real life. A lot of Zooms, but it is really cool to meet actual human readers in person. So I'm the author of Restart and many other books. So let me tell you a little bit about where Restart came from. I hope this is not going to be sort of a disappointment, but it's not a true story, right? Restart is about a kid who has an accident, has amnesia. I've never had amnesia. I did not fall off my roof. I don't know anybody whose personality changed because they had a gigantic accident. So I got the idea for Restart when I was just thinking about what makes us the kind of people we are, right? You ever think about where your personality comes from? I mean, is your personality sort of hardwired into you? It's your nature, you're stuck with it, you can't change it even if you want to. Or is it nurture? Is it, you know, kind of, I don't know, shaped by the stuff that happens to you, the people you meet, the family you grow up with? And you know how on TV news they're always saying stuff like, ooh, scientists are performing an experiment to determine blah, blah, blah. I was like, they should really do an experiment to determine this because it's kind of who we are, right? So I started thinking, just for giggles, right? What would that experiment have to look like to test this? And it's tricky, but I kept coming back to amnesia, right? When your memory is wiped clean, do you automatically go back to the person you were before? Or might you be somebody totally different? And that's where I got the idea for Chase Ambrose, right, the main character of Restart. And if you remember the book, Chase is kind of a jerk, right? Like he's not a nice person. He's a bully, pushes people around. 90% of this school lives in fear of Chase Ambrose. And what happens is he's fooling around up on his roof. He falls, right? Boom, lands on his head. He survives, like he's okay, but he loses his memory. Total amnesia. And if you think back, the book really just asks one question, which is he going to go back to the kind of bully, mean person that he used to be, or is this his chance to restart his entire life and be a different kind of kid? So I actually wrote a pretty good first draft of Restart. The one thing I kind of messed up was I sort of made it a little bit too simple. Like in my first draft, as soon as Chase recovers from the accident, you can tell he's a different kind of kid. So the book almost read like, oh, he used to be so mean. Now he's nice. Hooray! And, you know, I don't know. It just didn't seem real to me, right? Like, you don't get to change everything about your life, boom, because one thing happened. And you're looking at me like, dude, Chase has amnesia. He doesn't even remember the bully that he used to be. And true, Chase does not remember his old self, but his old life is totally still there, right? His kind of co-bullies, these two kids, Aaron and Bear, from his football team. The power that he used to have as kind of the alpha jock of this school is right there waiting for him to reach out and grab it. And he's tempted, not because he's a horrible person, but just because if you lose your memory, like, wouldn't you naturally kind of latch onto the one thing you know about yourself that's true, no matter what it is? He has to choose to be a different kind of kid. So when I did the rewriting and revising of Restart, that's what I wanted to do, is fix it so that you don't know until the very last chapter if this kid is going to be able to pull it off. Is it ever possible to restart? Now, last thing I hope you found familiar about Restart was just middle school, right? I mean, the whole book takes place either in or kind of orbiting this one middle school. And I love writing about middle school. And I think that's because, do you guys know that I wrote my first book when I was 12? I mean, obviously a long time ago, but my first book was my 7th grade English assignment. So, true story. In my middle school, get this, the track coach had to teach English. And that was sort of like a scheduling mix-up, right? Like they were one English teacher short, but the way our schedule worked, the only adult who was available to cover our class in that hour was this coach, right? So, nice guy, good teacher, but he was 22. It was his first year teaching. All his training was PE, so he'd never taught English in his life. And when it came to creative writing, he just sort of didn't know what to tell us to do. And he drew a blank. And he stood there saying, okay, work on whatever you want for the rest of the year. It was February, right? So from February to June, we had a 45-minute class period, like every day, to write one story. And at first, I just started working on it in class, right? What choice did I have? That's what we were doing. I got into it, right? My story kind of took off. I started bringing it home, working on it at night. And by the time it was done, I wrote my first book. It was called This Can't Be Happening at McDonald Hall. Oh, you know what grade I got on my very first book? B+. They gave me A+ on the story, but they deducted 1 grade for actually messiness, right? That's how long ago it was. So I was in middle school in the 1970s. Back then, you couldn't write on a computer or an iPad. Like, I wrote the whole book in cursive on one of those, do you ever see those old marble notebooks? I think they're still around these days. But you know how I got it published? So I was the class monitor for Scholastic book orders, right? Like, back in the day, they used to let a kid run that for the whole class. So if you think about it, I had their address, right? Because it's printed on all the book order sheets. Seriously, I mailed my project to the address on the Scholastic forms. You're kind of looking at me like, that works? I lucked out. The guy at Scholastic who opened up my packet found my project. Now, I didn't send in the marble notebook full of scribbles. Truth, I got my mom to type it for me, right? To this day, honestly, I have no idea if I ever would have become a writer if she had said no. Right? But she did. She typed it. So at that point, my book is like a stack of typed pages. That's what the guy read. He liked it. So he kicked it over to his boss, and she liked it. And a few days after my 13th birthday, So at that point, I'm out of 7th grade. I was an 8th grader, and I signed a contract for my very first book. And it still took like a year for the book to come out. But there I was. At that point, I was 14. I was a freshman in high school, and I had this book out. Guys, I turned 58 last fall. So I've been writing kids' books for more than 3/4 of my life. Like, that book has been out for 44 years. It's been in, other countries. There are 3 Netflix movies spun off it. It's been translated into, French, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, Italian, Korean, Dutch, and Greek. Isn't that wild to see your 7th grade project in, Norwegian or something? I love, probably too much, looking at my books in other languages because, I can't really read them. But if the alphabet's the same, it's actually pretty cool how much you can pick up. Like, McDonald Hall, right, is a school. So the principal is this guy, Mr. Sturgeon, and his nickname behind his back, everybody calls him the fish. So in French, he becomes Monsieur Sturgeon, and his nickname becomes Caviar. Like, it's just not a slam dunk to put stuff into another language. I wrote this book a long time ago, not one of my more successful ones. Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire. I was trying to write for little kids. Never been good at it, right? But when Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire was done in French, get this, the book translated fine. How do you translate the title? Something like Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire, which is just an expression, won't translate because you're not really saying what you mean to begin with. My translator told me to put liar, liar, pants on fire, word for word, into another language would be like calling the book, Teller of Untruths, Your Trousers Have Combusted. And that sort of blew me back a little bit, but I knew this guy who worked for Pepsi. And he was like, oh, that's nothing. Remember a few years back, there was an old Pepsi ad on TV, and the big slogan was, "Come alive with the Pepsi generation." Well, supposedly, when they translated that into Chinese, it actually turned out to say, "Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave." And, well, I guess I don't feel so bad about my little liar, liar. I don't know if any of you have seen a book of mine called Ungifted, right? So when Ungifted was done in Spanish, first thing they did was they pulled me aside and they were like, dude, the title's a problem, right? There's no word in all of Spanish that means ungifted. I mean, the way it's used in the book, which is sort of a regular, average, not gifted kid who gets sent to Genius Academy by mistake. Right, so I remember when my first Spanish Ungifted came in, here I am, like I'm psyched, I'm waiting to see my book with a one-word title, because that's what I wrote. You know what it was called? Un chico de lo más normal, which I believe means kind of like a kid who is extremely normal, right? Or a kid who couldn't be any more normal. Like way normal is the closest you can get to ungifted in another language. Anyway, so long story short, I wrote my first book for school. Oh, you know why I wrote my second book, honestly? Just to sort of prove I could, like prove it wasn't a fluke. And it sort of turned into my hobby in high school, right? And it went from project to hobby to summer job, right? And then eventually I graduated college and I just kept doing it, and it was my real job. Now, when I first got started writing, I wrote from a lot of personal experience, right? Makes sense, because back then, I was super close in age to my characters, my readers. But then what happened was, Well, as you can see, I got, way older. And look, I'm not putting myself down. I have great experiences as an old guy in my 50s, but they don't fit into the books that I write because, I write about kids. So halfway through my career, I had to totally reinvent where ideas came from. And I found the solution in 2 words, okay? What if? And believe me, I know how corny this sounds. I would not say it if I didn't truly believe it. What if are the 2 most powerful words for writers. I mean, think of any story. Isn't there always a what if in there somewhere, right? What if the ungifted kid got sent to the gifted school? Or what if kids had to steal back $1 million baseball card they've been swindled out of, right? But even true stories that nobody ever made up, they still kind of work as what ifs. Like, see if this sounds familiar. What if the world's largest ocean liner hit an iceberg and sank on its maiden voyage? Ring a bell? Like, nobody invented the Titanic, right? I mean, it's a true story. It's a piece of history. Still works as a what if. So, in your own writing, if you ever get writer's block, just ask yourself, okay, what are the what ifs of my story? And you know what? Honestly, if I've got a good what if, that's all I need. So, my newest book is called Operation Do-Over, right? I've been thinking about second chances. I mean, even writing Restart is a lot about second chances. But what if a kid got like an actual do-over? And Operation Do-Over is this kid named Mason. He's older, right? High school. His life has totally fallen apart. He's been expelled from school, his friends all hate him, and he realizes that everything bad in his life he can trace back to this one thing that happened 5 years ago in 7th grade when he and his best friend had this fight and never became like worst enemies from there on in. And he needs a do-over. Right? And he actually gets one. He's in a pretty bad car accident, and when he wakes up, he is in 7th grade, 5 years ago, and the fight with his best friend hasn't happened yet. So it's sort of cool for me to sort of explore, like, going back in time, because when you think of a book where the characters travel in time, it's always way more epic than that, right? Like, a kid from today goes back to King Arthur's court, and he shows everybody his iPhone, and they all think he's a wizard because, oh, what a wonderful thing. But to go back 5 years, the world isn't that different, right? There are no knights and kings and castles. I mean, the technology is pretty similar. The cars are similar. The buildings are exactly the same. And yet, there are some pretty big things when you go back 5 years. Like, COVID is a word that didn't exist 5 years ago. If you talk to people about a pandemic, they're like, what's a pandemic? Or are you talking about the pandemic from like 1918 when everybody got the flu? For Mason, his parents split up in the past 5 years. So when he goes back, he wakes up, his parents are still together. Should he try to kind of keep them from getting divorced, right? Like, his dad used to leave his socks all over the house and used to drive his mom crazy. So he's running around the house picking up dirty socks, throwing them in the hamper. 5 years ago, Mason's dog was still alive. His dog got hit by a car. Can he actually train his dog to not run out into the road because he knows what's going to happen? Like, if you got a do-over at your life, can you really change what happens? And even if you can, will you, by avoiding the first group of mistakes, make a second group of mistakes that might mess you up even worse in the future? To me, that's the power of what if, is you can really get pretty out there with it. Restart was a realistic fiction book, but not all my stuff is. I have a series called Masterminds, right? So what if the luckiest kids on the face of the earth discovered that their perfect life is a total lie? And I mean, everything about your life, right? The town they live in, guess what? 100% fake. Their identities are fabricated. Like, even the people you thought were your mom and dad turn out to be scientists posing as your parents who have been studying you since the day you were born, because your entire life is actually an experiment, right? I mean, what would that feel like? That's sort of the only way you can write a series like Masterminds, is you sort of put yourself in the mind of those characters, and how would they respond? Like, how would it feel to be 12, 13, maybe 14, and you discover your whole life is a lie like that? Well, my Masterminds characters, their answer was super simple. It was, bye. Like, we're out of here. We have got to escape. The experiment is called Project Osiris. Here's the thing. You can't escape Project Osiris. There's an invisible barrier around the town. So as soon as these kids are born, you get this tiny electronic chip surgically implanted. Like, it sort of goes there at the base of your skull. Here's the thing, though. You can't feel it. You can't see it. You have absolutely no idea it's there. However, if you get outside of town where the barrier is, you start to feel sick. And at first, you're not even going to notice. You're a little bit queasy, no big deal. But the further you go, the sicker you get. And eventually, you'll just pass out. That's a what if, too. So, for me, the only thing that might be a little more important than what ifs would be research, right? And I don't want to make too big a deal out of it. Like, most books don't require tons of research. You just have to make sure you know what you're talking about, right? Like, in Restart, I had to research amnesia. And you're looking at me like, dude, what's the research? The guy forgets everything. Well, I mean, he forgets a lot. He doesn't really forget everything. I mean, he has this accident, wakes up in the hospital. His mom is in the chair next to his bed. Does he remember her? No. But when he says, "Who are you, lady?" that proves he remembers how to speak. He can make his mouth work. He remembers the language. When he needs the bathroom, he remembers, oh yeah, you put one foot in front of the other. That's how you get over there. I mentioned the $1 million baseball card, right? Swindle. So I had to research, like, what makes certain really old baseball cards valuable. Just being old doesn't mean something's worth $1 million, right? So I started doing all this card collecting research, and this name kept coming up. Have you ever heard of this guy, Honus Wagner, right? So Honus Wagner is the player on the most valuable baseball card in history. He played like in 1909, so, over 100 years ago. Turns out, in 1909, kids didn't collect baseball cards. Adults did. So they used to sell them in cartons of cigarettes, right? Sort of blew my mind a little bit, but remember, 1909 was before they knew any of the bad stuff about smoking. But this guy, this baseball player, Honus Wagner, he was way ahead of his time. Turns out he was anti-smoking before anybody else in 1909. And he went to the card company and he refused to allow them to sell his card with cigarettes. So when you fast forward like 113 years, right, to today, the Honus Wagner card is the rarest card in the world. That's why it's so valuable. Not because it's old, because it's rare. And I've seen conflicting numbers, but there are either like 6 or 7 Honus cards anywhere in the world. So the last time one of them sold in like really good condition, it actually went for more than $2 million. I think it was almost 3. That is the kind of thing you're only going to get from doing research, right? And there are some books where, you know, the whole book is basically research. I mean, I have a book called Linked about a school. I mean, it's pretty serious. Like their school is being vandalized with kind of hateful, like gigantic racist symbols are being painted over the walls, but they can't figure out who's doing it, right? Super frustrating, because how do you fight that if you don't know who's doing it to you? So in an attempt to sort of fight back against this person they can't find, they decide to make a paper chain, 6 million links long, as a sort of a tribute to the victims of the Holocaust, right? And there's no way I could have come up with that if I didn't find out about this real school in Tennessee that did a project. They were studying the Holocaust, and they just got really hung up on the number 6 million, right? Which, when you think about it, we all know that 6 million is a big number. Have you ever actually looked at 6 million of something? Like, we don't know what 6 million looks like. So they decided to study the Holocaust. They wanted to collect 6 million of something. And they chose paper clips, right? And even though you can go to a store and buy a box of, 100 or 250 paper clips at a time, it's still really hard to get to 6 million of something. And they probably never would have gotten there, except they got famous, right? People found out what they were doing, and we're talking all around the world. People started sending in paper clips to this one school. By the end, it got really viral, right? Like they way overshot 6 million. I think they ended up with more than like 30 million paper clips or something. 2 movies have been made about this, a bunch of books. I mean, their project is now like a nationally recognized museum. Paper chain is even harder than that, right? Because you can buy a box of paper clips. The only way to make a chain is one link at a time. And these guys never would have a chance to make it, except, just like those kids in Tennessee, they get famous. This sort of YouTube personality takes them under his wing, broadcasts their cause to the world, and people all around the world start shipping paper chain to this one school. Without that, there is no way they could ever get to. I mean, a chain 6 million lengths is over 200 miles long, right? So the question is, are they going to make it? And more important, who is vandalizing their school and why? Anyway, so that's really where my ideas come from. It's a combination between real experiences, right? Kind of that what if thinking, goofy, but it's my 2 favorite words, and research. And any one of my books that you look at, you're probably going to find some example of all 3 of those things. But I know you guys probably have some questions, and I know that we have just a few minutes left. So why don't we deal with that? Yes? Oh, say that again? Can you go home and ask your parents? Oh, if they're scientists. Oh, yeah, maybe, I suppose. I'm guessing that the chances are they did not start the experiment again in Pulaski, New York, but it's worth a shot. Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I did. Yes. It's called Masterminds. I'm glad we're making an impression here. Masterminds is actually really cool. It was sort of a hard book to write just because the characters are in an experiment, they don't really know that they're in an experiment. So you're sort of narrating the book from the perspective of clueless people. It was a fun book to write, but it was definitely a tricky book to write. Yes? Absolutely, sure. Yes? Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I think, for me, the restart started with the what if thing, and just sort of exploring what makes us who we are. Like, is your personality sort of locked in your DNA, or is it, or is it sort of more changeable and shapeable and that kind of thing? I don't really choose. Obviously there's a lot of emotions in Restart, but I mean, then there, I don't know if you remember that one kid, Brendan, who has decided he wants to be a YouTuber, and he's doing all these crazy YouTube videos trying to go viral. So, I mean, his stuff is not all that emotional. It's mostly just kind of ridiculous and funny. So I think that I come up with the main idea, and whether it takes me in like a funny direction, an emotional direction, a sad direction, like I kind of let the story sort of find its own place in that way. A great question, though. Yes? Sorry, I didn't quite hear you. That is a really good question. If it had not been for that 7th grade English assignment, would I still be a writer? I don't know, because when I was in school, I always got better grades in math and science than English. So I might have gone into more of a science or a tech direction, right? That's why I sort of said I wasn't kidding around. If my mom hadn't typed the book for me in 7th grade, I might be doing a different job today. Because before like technology, where pretty much everyone knows how to use a keyboard to some extent, like we used to type. A kid in middle school would type like literally one finger, click, click, click. Like I never would have had the attention span to type an entire book. So it's possible my entire life would have been different if not for that project. Yes? How do I come up with the themes? I'm not really like a moral guy. Like I'm not trying to teach a lesson. So no one has ever read one of my books and sort of finished the last page and said, now I know the meaning of life, right? Which is not to say that my books don't have those kinds of themes and morals in them. Like Restart is very much about discovering who you are, second chances. It's kind of about bullying a little bit, like it's kind of an anti-bullying theme. But I didn't sit down to write an anti-bullying book, right? Like I think that if I had sort of sat down to write a book that tells a lesson, I don't think anyone would want to read that. For me, it's all about the story, and I kind of let the theme get there on its own. I worry more about writing an entertaining story so that people will want to keep turning pages. I don't know if you ever heard of like people who refer to a book as a page turner, but to me, that's the ultimate compliment, right? That if you're on page 23, that you really, really want to know what it says on page 24, and that's why you keep reading. Yes? So I really don't have a favorite of my own books. I tend to get the most excited about what's newest. So for me, obviously, Operation Do-Over literally came out less than a week ago. Linked is still very new. It's a 2021 book. I don't know if you've seen Unplugged. It's the one with the little lizard on the cover. That's also a 2021 book. So not that they're better than all the others. They're just the ones that I'm the most pumped up about. Yes? Yeah, that's a great question. Which of the books was the hardest to write? I mean, I think that when there's an element of mystery to something, it's always a little bit trickier because you want to reveal information carefully. You don't want to make it too easy for a reader to sort of guess what's really going on. So for something like, well, a lot of mine have mystery, but like Masterminds, right? As the kids try and figure out the experiment that they're part of. Or Notorious, which is sort of like a classic murder mystery about a dog. You know, those are the ones that were probably the most challenging to write. I don't know if you guys need to run or if we got time to do a couple more questions. Yes. Sure, so the question is, have I ever gotten sort of stumped on a book to the point where I want to drop it? I mean, I do have that, but I think one of the ways I avoid that problem happening is I always make an outline first, like I'm a planner. So it doesn't have to be, you know, every single thing in the book is planned, but I always want to know, like, the beginning, I want to know the kind of the ending, doesn't have to be exact, and maybe 2 or 3 big moments in the middle. And so whenever I get stumped, I can always refer back to that plan, and I know where I have to go next. I'm trying, am I missing anything, or we're good? All right, I will be seeing some of you guys later at autographing, but while I've got you all together, thanks so much for inviting me to Pulaski. Bye, guys.